Hello, this is Transduction Signal on DubLab Radio, and I'm your host, Trovarsi, along with Orly Gal. Join us each month on DubLab Radio for Transduction Signal. This is a show where we invite our special guests. Well, they'll share a live performance with us. They'll give us a short breakdown of their setup, and then we'll talk about their musical journey, what happens in their lives, and how they got to where they are and what they're doing today. So, who do we have, Orly?
Tonight we have Heather Stebbins. She is a composer, a technologist, a synthesist, and an educator based in Washington, D.C. She's also the assistant professor of electronic and computer music at George Washington University.
Wow.
Yes, super excited to have her on the show.
Hey, Heather.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Great.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm super, super stoked. So, before we have a lot of questions for you, at least I know we have a lot of questions for you. But before we get into that, we'd like to share your performance with everyone first.
Okay.
Is there anything that you want to say or before we start, or do you want to just hit play?
I think we're safe to hit play. There's two main sections in it. I would say there's almost like two pieces within the larger work. That's all I'll say for now.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing it. So
awesome.
All right. So everyone mute. so awesome.
Oh, thank you. Fun to watch yourself being sarcastic.
I know it's a little nerve-wracking, right? But it was amazing. I have so many questions. How are you doing there, Orly? Are you okay? She's all right. All right.
Okay.
No, it was fantastic. Like, I love the scale choice that you used in both pieces. There's just so many different textures. Like, all right, yeah. So I even wrote some notes down because I have so many questions I didn't want to forget. But first, before I guess, like, do you want to give us like a general overview, like your setup, what you were doing, like your setup, what was happening, like that?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, so when I perform live, I usually perform with a combination of synthesizers, material in Ableton, and then cello with guitar effects pedals. And I found that combination provides me enough of a palette to like be a one-woman show and also feel confident enough to play my instrument in front of people, because I truly have not like played or performed really since 2009. This was kind of like a scary thing to get back into it in the last couple of years. So this setup has worked well for me as I've gotten back into performance. So do you want to hear like about like the specific pieces of gear, or like how everything's connected? Like how techie do we want to get?
Let's well, just because some people will be listening, some will be able to watch the video later. Yeah. So just kind of give like a general. So I noticed you had like a modular case. I think I saw like a push 2 or up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe just like kind of like what's in your case a little bit.
Yeah. So my case, I really connect with make noise modules. So there's a lot of make noise in there. I'm using Morphogene has kind of been the heart of basically every patch that has turned into something that I want to share with the world, often running into Mimeophone. And I recently got their Spectrophone, their new instrument. So the second piece I performed was taking advantage of that. Although full disclosure, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface in terms of what it can do. And then I use the usual suspects for modulation. I've got immutable instrument stages in there, tides that I'm using, Pamela's new workout for triggering certain sequences. And then I have a make noise zero control for, usually I use it for bass lines and then other types of modulation, and a strega for that extra fuzz and noise that I like to incorporate. And then I use the push mainly to control sends to different return tracks within Ableton, and occasionally trigger some samples that I have loaded up into Ableton, although most of the time the samples are coming from the modular rig so that I can process them directly. And then for that, for this performance, the guitar effects pedal I was using was a Microcosm by Hologram Electronics. So I'm running the cello directly into that, but I also used a microphone to capture the acoustic instrument, so that's in the mix of it. That's pretty typical setup for most of my live shows now.
Got you. No, like it sounded amazing. Orly, do you have a question before I ask her another question? Or
are you able to travel with that much, like internationally?
Oh gosh, I have only flown. No, I mean I'm definitely not like performing internationally right now. I have flown with my cello internationally one time, and this was like back in 2008, and I swore I'd never do it again because it was like traumatic. The TSA broke through my flight case, and like I found a note on my cello when I got to my destination in Eastern Europe. So I was like, yeah, it's not worth it. When I do gigs where I need to travel, like I've taken stuff on the train, I don't bring my cello. I just don't perform with it when I do that. And I do sometimes perform DAW-less. And so in that case, it's the modular rig, which last year, my partner was kind enough to build me a new case that's like a suitcase, so I can shut it and lock it, which is amazing because my old case didn't have a cover. So yeah, it's tricky. It feels like way too much gear for what I'm doing, but I have tried to slim it down, and it's like I feel like I need my cello. It's almost like a security blanket at this point. So when I perform locally, yeah, it's coming with me.
Nice. Yeah, no, like I understand the whole travel gear thing, but so like, okay, so before we go down there, I just want to circle back to your Ableton. And so when you're writing your pieces, because it is a hybrid, like this is a true hybrid setup, which is
right,
awesome, right? So you have your modular, you have your cello. What do you start with first, like when you're writing a piece? Like,
that's a great question. I mean, I feel like when I'm working in this mode, I always start modular, and I almost always start with a sample in Morphogene. So for the first half of the piece, that was using a sample made by Sonal Systems. They put out a lot of different reels for Morphogene, and they sent me a couple packs recently that I was playing with. But most of the time, I'm using a sample that I've either found or recorded myself, and I just sort of try to let my musical intuition take control. Because I'm like a quote classically trained composer, I feel like I had to unlearn a lot of like very like craft things, which I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I feel more like my musical self when I'm improvising. And so that's the approach that I take. And usually I need to start with it's not tangible, but sonic output. And then I'm like, okay, this needs to go there. And then if I want to use my cello, I'll pick it up.
Totally. That makes sense. Like, do you feel like okay, well, first of all, be full disclosure, like, so you and we connected through social media, right? Like just through the groups, all
as it happens. Yeah.
Right. Through the pandemic, all that stuff. And I've been following you, and I always just love your posts, like, because there are all these like these musical clips of what you're doing and everything like that. So then I was like, oh yeah, she would be, talk to Orly. She'd be great to have on the show. And then I started to dive into your background, and I was just like, it's amazing. Like you're so accomplished. Like, so it's so great it's so nice to have you on here. And so how did you go from, being a composer and working like with orchestral instruments, like in playing the cello, and you said as I see you play the guitar too, like to modular, I guess. Like what was your
how did I fall down the rabbit hole?
Yeah.
I mean, so like I've always been involved like in my like musical career, technology, like beyond acoustic instruments, because I do consider those technology, but like hardware and software has always been a big part of what I want to do. I mean, when I was going back to high school, I was a session musician for like different bands, and it got me into the studio, and I was just like blown away by what you could do with sound in the digital realm. And so I was like, I want to do that. Like, I love playing cello. I love playing guitar. I don't play guitar very well. But I need to be able to make more sound on my own. So I kind of like started using mostly DAW-based processing. And then during the pandemic, I don't know, I forget how I first saw like something from Make Noise, not even on Instagram. I wasn't even on, like, I didn't have like a music account or whatever. I think I saw it in like a newsletter, and I was like, oh, those blinky lights. and then I also noticed that I used to use this software called SoundHack, which was made by Tom Erb, who now does some programming with Make Noise. And I know that name. They're doing cool stuff. What is this? What is this like modular world? Because I had played with like semi-modular synthesizers and software synths prior to that, but I had no experience. So in early 2021, a acquaintance like in the DC area was selling a No Coast. It's like a semi-modular synthesizer by Make Noise, and he offered to sell it to me. I have it right here in my little, like on my desk. I barely use it now, but it was like my first synth. And I'm like, I need to learn how to use this. And I want to learn it intentionally and like record everything that I make, because otherwise, like, I just felt like I needed to establish a practice because, you know, it was pandemic. Everybody was all over the place. Right. And so I just started learning. And for a while I was like, okay, I'm just going to have this little semi-modular synthesizer. I got the zero control to control it. And everything I made was so bad. I will never share that with anybody. But then that summer, my partner bought me the Morphogene. I was like, well, if I got this, I should probably like make it work with fully modular in some way. So I had a little teeny tiny case, and I saw like a post by Patrick, because at this point I was like, you know what, I'm going to start like documenting this. I'm going to make like a music Instagram account. And then Patrick O'Brien, POB, I saw a post or something, and he was starting up modular on the mall here in DC. Like, that looks cool. And I like submitted a Google form to perform there, and performed for the first time in October of 2021, and was like, that was fun. Let's do that again. So yeah, it's still like, it feels like I've been doing it a while, but also like it's still really new, because it's been like 2 years that I've been like in the modular world.
I have so many questions for you. But first, to piggyback on the question that you just answered, I saw like that you use the very unique combination of voltage, nature, and found objects, and then the cello. How do you come up with? Well, I'm guessing what sparks your imagination to go to voltage?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like I gravitate towards samples, both musical and sort of more found sound samples. And then I have this tendency to use voltage, like oscillators to make bass lines. I like feel like writing a good melody is the hardest thing in the world to do. So I don't do it very often. I like stick
I'm
with
a bass player. I feel you with all my heart.
It's like the hardest thing to do musically. I'm like pop musicians, I have so much respect for, because I don't know how you write a catchy melody. But yeah, no, I think for me, like back when I was writing music for acoustic instruments and electronics, like pre-modular world, I was still working with those same types of sounds, just in a different way. And so this felt like a really natural extension, except I have immediate access to them. So before I would, write music for, let's say, a chamber ensemble, a couple of players, plus some sort of electronic playback. And it would take months to write the piece. And then I would give the score to the performers and they would play it. So it would take a long time to really hear what it sounds like. But now I have immediate access, and that feeds my creative practice a lot more. Like, I need that immediate feedback so that I can then improvise with it. Because I think at my core, like my first musical experiences were as a listener, but then I became I wasn't performing publicly, but I started learning an instrument pretty young. I was very fortunate. And I think even though I'm still terrified of performing, like deep down, performance and improvisation is like when I'm most myself. And so this gives me that, like, and allows me to make a big, dense sound with just my, 10 fingers. So,
yeah.
Nice.
Do you come from a lineage of classical musicians?
In terms of like who I've studied with, or like my family?
As in how you really decided that that's the route you wanted to go to?
Not at all. I grew up pretty close to several members of my mom's side of the family, like extended family, and they all were musicians, but nobody was professional. Everybody like playing music was something that you did as a hobby. And so I was very lucky to be surrounded by people that felt like pursuing music was like a really important thing to do. But there was no pressure and also no stylistic pressure. It wasn't like I had to do classical music. I mean, I did because that was sort of my entryway into the cello, but I expanded beyond it pretty quickly.
Is the cello like your first instrument? Like, is that the first instrument you went with? Okay.
Yeah, I started learning cello when I was 6, and then played through college, and then realized I didn't have the chops to be a professional player. I didn't want to be a professional player, but it's been like something that it's not exactly like riding a bike, but I have not lost like the ability to quickly connect with my instrument even after a long period of time. I certainly can't play, like I don't have the dexterity that I used to, but I know what I can still do, and I lean on those things.
Very cool.
I come from the absolute opposite. I come from a classical lineage, and I ended up going the opposite way into electric bass because I said, if I can't carry my cello, I'm not playing it. So it's super interesting to me, the complete opposite. And it's so nice to hear that you went in that realm and ended up, without any pressure to do so.
Yeah, I feel pretty lucky about that.
It's very so how did you wind up at the university then? So what was your
so I have a doctorate in music that I got from Boston University. I finished in 2016, and then the election happened, and I didn't want to go the route of like adjuncting. I had a very young son at the time, and I was just feeling a little like disillusioned with academia. So I pivoted and was a high school math teacher for a little while in Boston. And then I just happened to be perusing job openings, not thinking I was seriously going to get back into the market for university positions. But I saw this position open at George Washington University, which really like fit the description of what I wanted to do. It's a liberal arts institution. It's not a music conservatory, and it's teaching electronic music. It wasn't like a lot of the jobs are like, you'll teach composition and Western classical theory and maybe a little bit of music tech. It's like, this was specifically music tech. And so I took a chance and applied, and I both worked hard and got really lucky. So here I am, which is nice because I'm from the Baltimore area. So it was like, not exactly coming home, but coming to a place that, I was used to and closer to family. So like practically it was also pretty amazing.
That is pretty amazing. Like being close to home and doing a job that you're like actually like
right
and interested in. That's
and in a place that really shocked me in terms of like how supportive and vast the like electronic and experimental music community is. Boston has a lot of music schools, and there's just like so many musicians, and that was great in certain ways, but also really daunting and tough in others. And then when I moved here, I was like, oh, there's probably not going to be all that much going on. But then it's just like, there's such a supportive community, and there's so many people. It's been really, really pleasantly surprising. And I'm so happy to be here and be
So I see that you are pretty involved with like meeting Patrick POB and Modular. I almost said Modular World, but have you played Modular World? Actually, no.
I did a patch on challenge with them, but I have not actually played Modular World.
Okay. I'm sure that's probably coming, knowing Jono.
I've had conversations with Jono. He's great.
Yeah. But no, the whole community there, it's pretty nice. And I saw that you're playing, you have an upcoming show at one of the, like an art workshop. Do you want to tell us like what is that place? Is it, how do you say it?
Rhizome.
Rhizomes. Thank you.
Yeah. Rhizome is our beloved, very punk old house with a not so great sound system. But it's like the place to do experimental shows for audiences of like 3 people to, 30 people cramming into this old house, which is awesome. So I play there a fair amount, enough for me, a mom with a full-time job. So it fills that sort of creative cup in my life. And I have a show coming up there September 15th where I'm playing alongside one other solo artist who's also a cellist, but like a professional cellist and synth player, and then a duo that's viola plus cello. So it's going to be like full string night. And then I'm doing I have to admit I'm a little intimidated because they're like legitimate string players, but it'll be fun. And then
you're legit too. Like,
I mean, thank you. Like it can be frustrating when like, your hands used to be able to do certain things a long time ago when you were actually practicing every single day, but it doesn't happen anymore. And that's fine. And then in October, I'm doing a joint workshop and then performance with two local musicians, Natalie Chammy, who goes by Tal Sounds, and then Alma Laprida, two really incredibly talented and amazing women that we're going to put together a workshop about like, what is an instrument in the 21st century and how can we expand our sonic palettes? And then we're going to play a bunch of noise later that night. So that'll be fun.
That
and that's at
interesting
GW.
And fun.
Yes. Yes. And it's free. So that's great.
Cool. Well, as far as like the show links, we'll make sure that we drop all that information in the description so people that are in your area can really take advantage. Yeah, go out, take advantage of that.
Thank you.
How does it feel to play live as an electronic musician versus as a classical musician?
I prefer it so much more. It feels so freeing. I mean, it's hard for me. Like, I can still remember the anxiety I used to get before performing. I played like solo recitals and then like in string quartets and string trios and stuff, and playing that repertoire that has like such an established history, sort of like classical and romantic repertoire, was really anxiety producing because it was like, do I have the technical ability, but also so many other people have played this music. Like, what am I going to add to that already really vast, like, collection of performances and recordings? Whereas playing as an electronic musician, it adds that element of improvisation. And it's like, if I screw up, I can fix it. And it doesn't really matter. I'm much more like in the moment and not thinking about technique or thinking about like these really, huge histories and lineages, because it's just like, it's my material in this moment. And then I might not ever be able to do it again. And that's okay. So.
Right. If it's any consolation, anytime I feel as a spectator versus somebody that is up on stage with such a huge amount of pressure, you can never tell. But music is so deep and people are so into, it's so emotive that it doesn't really matter. So I feel like you can do no wrong. The only other people judging is probably the musicians on stage.
Totally. Yes, absolutely.
Right.
How was your experience in Estonia? I see that you did a fellowship out there.
Yeah, that was life-changing. I was very fortunate to get a Fulbright fellowship to study in Estonia for an academic year. And I was there working with a specific composer, but also just like going to concerts all the time. They have such a rich musical, both history, and then music just felt like a much more cared for part of society than I feel in the US. Like, you would see I was in the capital city and you would see like banners for a contemporary music festival, like up in the city or like, on like the buses. And like, you would never see that here. Like, these little like festivals wouldn't get nearly as much funding or like community support. So that was really amazing. And while I was there was a master's program going on with, I believe there were 8 or maybe 10 improvisers from all over the world that were all gathering there. And I got to work with them. And actually, I think that was the first time I ever saw a modular synthesizer performance. Now that I'm thinking about it, I went to a concert and there was somebody performing on one. I had no idea what it was. But yeah, now that I'm thinking about that, was the first time I ever saw a Euro rack set up live.
It's like a subconscious seed.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's funny. Like, I don't feel like, I mean, yes, I love my modular rig, but all things considered, it's pretty small. Like, I'm not interested in building out this huge rig. Like, it's just, it feels like a means to an end for me. So I don't feel like, I don't know. I feel like I'm sort of like at the fringe of that world because I don't sort of get into the gear in the way that a lot of people do. But
right. I mean, it is sort of like some of the culture of modular, right? It's like the whole like different modules do different things, the buying, the trading, the talking about it. I feel like sometimes there's a lot more of talking about it or whatever than opposed to analyzing it as opposed to actually using it. And I myself can be a little guilty of that too sometimes, but
it's hard not to when people are constantly making new things that do like all sorts of incredible processing of sound, and it's hard not to get caught up in that. I think it would be you'd be lying if you said you weren't, somehow intrigued. But yeah, I try to stay on the fringe.
Are you teaching your students a little bit of modular or just pure computer science and production? What exactly do you get into?
We don't have an audio engineering program. We don't have like the most robust studio, but what we do have is a lot of very curious students. And I think that's the best thing to have. And so I teach a variety of classes. But last year I started a class on synthesis, and we did both software and hardware, everything from semi to fully modular synthesizers. And I really kind of let the students explore different methods of doing synthesis and also with both software and hardware, and let them figure out what they connected with the most. And we have a very modest modular rig, but we also have a collection of different semi-modular synthesizers. So it's like, if the students are, more into that, they can focus on it. It's not like all Euro Rack all the time. And I also teach with VCV Rack because I think that's a great way to get started with the kind of concepts behind Euro Rack, especially for students for whom it's like a really expensive hobby to get into. This is a great way to kind of explore.
So you went from not knowing anything pre-pandemic on modular synthesis to teaching in university.
Yes, which makes me feel like
thank you very much.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say I was a total beginner because the end result of all music making is sound. And I feel like I've been teaching about sound for a long time. And a lot of the concepts behind modular are, an LFO is an LFO is an LFO. It doesn't matter if it's being made by, a module or in a DAW. So it wasn't like a huge jump for me conceptually. It was more like, my gosh, there's so many modules to choose from. How do I know what's good? Like, how do I know what to get? How do I know, what does HP mean? You know what I mean? Like, it was like figuring that stuff out rather than the concepts. So a little bit of imposter syndrome, yes, but it wasn't totally starting from nothing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, especially since you've been using the computer and you've been classically trained, essentially knowing music. I mean, but I do have one question. I want to kind of go backwards a minute. Sorry. Mm-hmm. So when you were performing, with your setup, do you sequence in your modular rack, or were you sequencing in Ableton as well? Did you say that or no?
No, I can't remember if I said it. For this set, it was all the sequencing was coming from the modular rig. So all the bass line that was coming from the zero control. There was one in the second half there that's sort of almost sine wavy droney bit. That was actually a recording of my neighbor. She performs. She does sound baths, and she has a whole collection of crystal bowls, and I recorded one of her improvs. So that sequence was coming from a sample in Ableton, but everything else was coming from the modular rig.
Got it. Okay. And I do have another question for you. So being that, coming from classically trained, playing the cello, going into performing with Rack and what have you, do you feel like that you need to stick to that theory, like using music theory, or do you feel like you don't want to and it's hard to break away? Like, what is your, I'm sure
my
it's
hang
hard
up
to sum up in a few minutes, but yeah.
Yeah.
There is one for everyone, especially
Yes.
when they have been trained. So what's yours? Yeah.
I haven't thought about like Western classical music theory since I took my doctoral exam in 2013, to be perfectly honest. But I do think it's something like, if you are trained in a certain way, like you can't, it's really hard to unlearn those things. And I don't really want to, because many of them informed my musical intuition, whether it's something that I'm working with or working against. Like, it is part of who I am as a musician. And so I firmly believe that it's informing everything that I do today. My hang up, I think, is I tend to fall into pretty typical patterns, which is like, okay, I'm going to build something that's going to layer, and I'm going to bring in a bass line, and then there's going to be some reverb, and there's going to be some like textural bits, and like, I know what I like, and I tend to fall into different versions or different flavors of that same recipe. So I am kind of trying to work against that, but also trying to like accept the fact that, like, maybe this is my musical language, and I'm going to explore it throughout my creative practice in different ways. But like, at the end of the day, I know what I like to make, and it's going to be, some iteration of that.
Yeah, no, it was beautiful. So yeah, keep doing more.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one more question for you.
Go for it, Orly.
Where do you think the next generation is going to musically, since you're training them?
Oh my gosh.
That's a good question.
That's a really hard question. I mean, I think the easy thing to say is like, oh, like the TikTok generation, they just need new things all the time. Like, attention spans are shrinking, whatever else. But I'm constantly amazed by the students that I meet that are like, when I ask them like what they're listening to, it's all over the place. It's like both genre wise and time period wise. If I had to guess, and I am not a good gambler, but if I had to guess, it would just be like more experimentation of combining disparate things. And I think like, as long as we have curious people, like, and people that are willing to, dig deeper into like what is out there, because there's just so much music out there beyond like what we hear all the time. Hopefully we'll get some exciting, or we'll continue to get some exciting results.
Are you guys training AI as well?
Oh gosh, no, that's actually, it's funny. I've started like putting like my AI policies in my syllabi and stuff like that. But we're like, from a creation standpoint, I don't want to pretend like I even know where to start in terms of engaging in that way. And I'm actually not worried about like my musical like area being infiltrated by that. Like, I'm not worried about these types of positions. I don't think machine learning can really replace what we do, especially when we use our hands. Like, yeah.
No, I believe that's probably going to come in more within the realm of synthesis, and in bettering the way that we're using the machines and creating that modular wave rather than things that we can do physically. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. But I'll be curious to see, because it's really hard for me to imagine like what would come next. It's like once we got into the digital era, it's like, how do we go beyond this? And maybe this is the path. We'll see.
So what advice would you give to somebody who is like, right now they want to dip their toe into modular? Like, what would you?
I would say start with VCV, or if you're lucky enough to live in a community that might have like a lending library, before you dive in, because it's one thing to like read a bunch of forums and say like, oh, this is the most popular module. Like that doesn't mean you will connect with it. Like I have been very surprised to see, like I have students who, we have a Moog Mother 32 and DFAM in our studio. And some students have done just the most remarkable things with those instruments. I cannot make them do anything that I want them to. And it's like, I wouldn't have known that. And it's been really, really fascinating to see like how people connect with different devices. So I don't think you can know that from the beginning, which is a shame because we don't have a ton of like lending libraries or spaces where you can try stuff out before you buy. I would say try things if you're able to get access to them before you make a purchase.
Right. No, I agree with you 100%, especially with the VCV Rack. Like I always recommend that to people as well.
Yeah.
Just because you can try so many different things.
Totally.
Do you use VCV Rack in your music or
no, which I feel like that's not because I don't think it's a valid instrument in any ways. It's more that I kind of got into modular because I needed that tactileness. Like I needed a knob to turn. I needed a touch plate. I've been working in DAWs for a really long time and I felt like I was doing the same things over and over again. And I still work in DAWs, but I think bringing in modular was a way, again, for me to get back into performance, but to also kind of like find new access to my creative practice in a way that's been super, super rewarding. So I don't use it because I don't like it. I don't use it because like I need a knob to turn physically.
I totally understand that. That's sort of what pulled me into it too. Aside from the sonic,
yeah.
Of it, but yeah. Orly, do you look like you're on the verge of asking a question? I don't want to cut you off.
Me?
We're reaching the top of the hour.
I just want to know what's next for you.
Yes.
Oh, I mean, I feel like I made a lot of music very quickly with my modular and semi-modular setup. I felt like I got a lot of stuff out, and some of it I still really like. Some of it I'm like, I don't really care for that. So I think what's next for me is like trying to hone in and like try to make different sounding things that are still me using the same gear that I already have. Like I want to feel like I'm really deeply learning every module that I have and taking advantage of the gear that's already at my disposal. So deeper dives into some of these techniques, I think, is on the horizon.
Nice. Peeling back the layers, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It's been really cool talking to you guys.
Yeah. We have so many more questions, so we probably have to bring you back again. If you
happy to do it. No, definitely
awesome.
not. Definitely not.
And thank you so much for being here, Heather. Really appreciate it.
Oh,
thanks for sharing your time. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. I hope it cools down for you and you can turn your AC back on soon.
Thank you.
It's about to get hot in DC too, right?
Yep. Your heat is coming our way next week. So.
All right. Well, on that note, this is Trovarsi and Orly Gal on Transduction Signal. See you later. Keep making music, right?
Bye-bye.